Solemn, reflective music begins and fades into the background. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today, we're journeying back in time to one of the most pivotal and dramatic moments of the 20th century, the Fall of Saigon, April 30th, 1975. For some, it was a day of liberation and reunification. For others, it was a day of profound loss, fear, and the end of a world they once knew. The images from that day are seared into our collective memory. Helicopters precariously perched on rooftops, desperate crowds surging towards the American embassy, and tanks rolling through the gates of the presidential palace. But how did it come to this? How did a two-decade-long conflict involving the world's greatest superpower culminate in such a chaotic and heart-wrenching finale? To truly understand the fall of Saigon, we must first rewind the clock, not just by days or weeks, but by years. The groundwork for 1975 was laid long before. The Paris Peace Accords, signed in January 1973, were meant to end the war and bring peace to Vietnam. The agreement called for a ceasefire, the complete withdrawal of U.S. troops, and the release of all prisoners of war. On paper, it seemed like a resolution. American soldiers went home, and a fragile peace settled over the land. However, the core political conflict between North and South Vietnam was far from resolved. The accords left the government of South Vietnam, led by President Nguyen Van Thieu, in place, but it also allowed North Vietnamese Army, or NVA units, to remain in strategic positions within the South. It was a political compromise that left both sides armed, in place, and deeply distrustful of one another. For the next 2 years, this so-called peace was punctuated by constant ceasefire violations and skirmishes. The South Vietnamese Army, the ARVN, fought on, but they were now without the massive air and logistical support from the United States that they had grown dependent on. Meanwhile, in the United States, the political will to continue supporting South Vietnam was rapidly eroding. The Watergate scandal consumed the Nixon administration, leading to his resignation in August 1974. His successor, Gerald Ford, faced a nation weary of war and an increasingly anti-war Congress. A critical blow came when Congress passed legislation that drastically cut aid to South Vietnam. For President Thieu and the ARVN, this was a devastating signal. They felt abandoned. The economic and military lifeline that had propped up their nation for years was being severed. Morale within the South Vietnamese military and government began to plummet. They were on their own. Sensing this weakness and the shifting political tides, the North Vietnamese leadership in Hanoi decided the time was right for a final, decisive push. In early 1975, they launched what they called the Ho Chi Minh Campaign. The initial objective was modest, to test the South's defenses and America's reaction. In January, they captured the province of Phuoc Long, a strategic area near the Cambodian border. They watched and waited. The response from Washington? Silence. President Ford requested emergency aid for the South, but Congress refused. This was the green light Hanoi had been waiting for. They realized that America would not re-enter the war. The limited offensive was immediately transformed into an all-out invasion. The NVA's next major target was Ban Me Thuot, a key city in the Central Highlands. They launched a surprise attack in March 1975, employing overwhelming force of tanks and artillery. The city fell in just 2 days. The speed and ferocity of the assault shocked the South Vietnamese command. In a decision that would prove catastrophic, President Thieu ordered a panicked and ill-conceived withdrawal from the entire Central Highlands. He hoped to consolidate his forces and form a more defensible line further south. But the retreat quickly descended into chaos. The poorly planned evacuation, clogged with terrified soldiers and their families, as well as tens of thousands of civilian refugees, turned into a slaughter. NVA forces relentlessly shelled the columns of people fleeing south on what became known as the Convoy of Tears. The ARVN's best units in the region simply disintegrated. The collapse was on. With the Central Highlands gone, the northern provinces fell like dominoes. Hue, the ancient imperial capital, was abandoned. Then came Da Nang, South Vietnam's second-largest city. The scenes from Da Nang were a terrifying preview of what was to come in Saigon. The airport was overrun by a mob of frantic soldiers and civilians, all trying to cram onto the last planes out. People clung to the landing gear of departing aircraft, only to fall to their deaths. The entire northern half of South Vietnam had collapsed in a matter of weeks. The NVA's advance was now a relentless torrent, sweeping down the coast towards the capital. Saigon, once a distant objective, was now directly in their sights. By late April, Saigon was a city gripped by fear and paranoia. The North Vietnamese army had encircled the capital, positioning their artillery within range. The distant thud of shells became a constant, ominous soundtrack to the city's final days. For the thousands of Americans still in Saigon, diplomats, intelligence agents, contractors, and journalists, as well as for hundreds of thousands of South Vietnamese who had connections to the American government or the South Vietnamese regime, the question was no longer if the city would fall, but when and how to get out. The primary escape route, Tan Son Nhut Airport, came under heavy rocket and artillery fire, rendering it useless for large-scale fixed-wing evacuations. The final desperate option was activated: Operation Frequent Wind. This was the helicopter evacuation, the enduring image of the fall of Saigon. American helicopters, Hueys and Sea Knights, began ferrying evacuees from designated zones within the city, most famously from the roof of the U.S. Embassy, to a fleet of Navy ships waiting offshore in the South China Sea. The scenes were of controlled chaos. Marines valiantly tried to maintain order as desperate crowds pushed against the embassy gates, pleading for a spot on one of the last flights to freedom. Inside, Ambassador Graham Martin, a man who had stubbornly refused to believe the end was so near, finally oversaw the shredding of documents and the evacuation of his staff. He himself would be one of the last to leave, carrying the folded American flag from the embassy under his arm. For 19 straight hours, the helicopters flew back and forth, a lifeline in the sky, rescuing over 7,000 Americans and South Vietnamese allies. But for every person saved, thousands more were left behind. As the last American helicopter lifted off the embassy roof in the pre-dawn hours of April 30th, a profound silence fell over the compound. The American war in Vietnam was officially over. A few hours later, North Vietnamese tanks flying the flag of the Viet Cong smashed through the wrought iron gates of the Independence Palace, the symbolic heart of the South Vietnamese government. General Duong Van Minh, who had been president for only 2 days, surrendered unconditionally. He famously told the North Vietnamese commander, "I have been waiting since early this morning to transfer power to you." The commander coldly replied, "There is no question of you transferring power. You cannot give up what you do not have." The Republic of Vietnam, after a 20-year existence, ceased to be. The city was quickly renamed Ho Chi Minh City, and the long, brutal war was finally at an end. The fall of Saigon was not just the end of a war, it was the beginning of a new, painful chapter for millions. It triggered one of the largest refugee crises of the 20th century. Hundreds of thousands of boat people fled the new communist regime in rickety, overcrowded boats, facing pirates, storms, and starvation in a desperate search for freedom. Many did not survive the journey. For the United States, the defeat in Vietnam left a deep and lasting scar on the national psyche, leading to years of introspection and a reluctance to engage in foreign interventions, a phenomenon known as the Vietnam Syndrome. The fall of Saigon remains a powerful and complex symbol, a symbol of military defeat, of political failure, of promises broken, but also of human resilience, the desperate will to survive, and the enduring hope for a new beginning. Thank you so much for joining us on this historical journey today. The story of the Fall of Saigon is a somber but crucial part of our modern history, with lessons that still resonate. If you found this documentary insightful, please consider liking the video and subscribe to our channel for more deep dives into the events that shaped our world. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Until next time, stay curious.